Hello my API enthusiast friends. Today we're going to use the Cat API to demonstrate how to favorite individual images for our users and let them unfavorite them at will. So we're going to make a little React app that uses the Material UI library, or MUI as it's now called, to show a grid of random cat images, show a bit of information about each of the breeds, a little checkbox that we customize to be a heart so a user can check which image they want to favorite, and in the background we're going to call the Cat API to favorite and unfavorite an image for an individual user. So the app's very simple. It's going to show a random feed of cat pictures, each with the breed information, and then allow a user to favorite each individual kitty, and then filter to only show those favorites, and then allow them to uncheck those favorites to remove them from their favorites list. Let's get started. So I've created a folder for our project, and in here I'm going to open my code editor, and we're just going to create a basic React app. So I'm just going to do npx create React app. I'm going to do dot because I want it to be created inside this folder and not have it create a new one. And we'll let that install, and whilst it's installing we're going to open the MUI.com webpage. And look at how we can get the npm libraries. So I'm going to ignore this one because I want a bit more detailed installation. So let's click Get Started, and we want the installation guide. So it looks like they've hidden it away, so we're just going to type in their installation, and in here we're going to copy this npm install, and then we'll install that in our app once the React components are finished installing. We're also then going to copy these two HTML elements and put them in our index.html. And back in our project, I'm just going to paste in that npm install. We'll let that go, and we'll find our index.html page, which is where we're going to add those two HTML tags. So it's in public index.html. We're also just going to clear out the general React cruft that we don't need, so we don't need any of this. We can clear out any of this. We're going to add our own favicon, so we can clean out all of that. We can clear off that. Might as well give this a name while we're here. Cat favorites, and clear out that because we don't need that, and we don't need these files either. Get rid of them, and the favicon too, because we'll be using our own. Great, so we've got our basic HTML. We'll go back to that web page, and we're going to copy these two tags. So we want the roboto. Copy that sucker, paste it in the header, and let's get the other fella. We'll grab this one, and we'll pop him in too. Cool, let's clear out the React app gubbins too, and so in app.js and index.js we're going to clear out this report vitals. We don't need that. And let's clear out the app.js. We don't need any of the standard React stuff. Clear out all of that and just leave an empty div. We don't need the logo anymore. We can clear out that logo. Leave a test. We'll clear out that. And that should be it. Now let's just do a test compile. So we'll do npm run start. We've probably forgotten something because I always do, but no, looks like we haven't. There should be a blank page. Great, so we just need to make sure that our app.js and our index.js are saved, because I think I cleared them out but didn't save them. And this is a good time just to put in a placeholder. So put in placeholder, and I'll save this file too. That'll have auto updated. Great, so we've got placeholder and a nice clean app to start with. So we're going to tidy up our app.css to make that placeholder text aligned to the far left. And let's just check that it is. Yep, so we've got a nice clean app. Next, we're going to add our navbar. So every app, mobile, desktop, needs a navbar for controlling and just navigating around the screen, around the app. So MUI has what's called an AppBar, which we're going to use as our navbar. So let's find an example of the AppBar that we like. We're just going to pick a basic one. It's got quite a few examples that you could copy and paste to suit your own personal needs. Let's just find the basic AppBar, show the source code. We want the JS, not the TypeScript today. We'll copy that. We're going to create a folder for our components. And in here, we're going to create a component called NavBar. NavBar.jsx. We're going to paste in that example code, and we're going to change this button AppBar to be called NavBar, because that's the name of our component. So let's delete that login button. We're not going to have login. We'll rename this to our standard app name. In fact, let's call it React Kitties Tutorial App. We will get rid of this icon bar on the left-hand side, and we are going to, instead of having it static, so when you scroll down the page, the app bar would disappear, we're actually going to make it sticky, so that it always sticks to the top. We are going to add this to our main app.js, and we're actually going to swap out this root div now for a MUI layout component. There's two real ones that are sort of containers. There's one which is box and one which is container. We are going to use box for now because it's got no styling associated with it, whereas container has, it's got different padding and things like that. So we've got our main box, and in here, relying on the autocomplete, I'm going to do navbar, and we are just going to close that out. Cool. Made a bit of mess. There we go. Let's clean that. Open and close tag, and it looks like we deleted that accidentally. Great. So we've got our box as our root element, and inside there is just going to be a navbar. Let's just make sure that navbar is cleaned up, and that this, it looks like we're using some components we haven't added, but that's fine. We can clean those out now. Give that a save. Happy days. Let's have a look. Here we go. React Kitties Tutorial App. Nice app bar. If we had some more content down here and we scrolled, we'd see that this was sticky and it stayed at the top. Let's create another component which just shows a random feed of kitty pictures. So we're going to call this component random feed.jsx, and this will be our first call to the cat API. So in here, I'm going to just create the standard React gubbins. There's a lot of good extensions you can install for, in this case, VS Code, but for whatever your code editor to have those React snippets. But if we just wanted to write it out in full this time, it would be import. We're going to import React from React. And we are going to then create our base component, which in this case will be, let's just call it feed. And then let's close that off. There's our component, random feed. Now we're going to, as our root, we're actually going to have a grid. And we're going to have a grid of image components. But we need to now create that image component, don't we? So let's create another component in here, and we'll call it image. Let's call it image.jsx. Image.jsx, and in here we're just going to have the actual rendering of what MUI calls is a card. Now, a card is a collection of components that could have a title, an image, some actions and buttons, and things like that. So let's find one of those card examples from MUI now. Let's go to card. And let's find one with a picture at least. How about this one with the player? Show the source. Again, JS, copy. We're going to clear out a lot of this with our own component. So the image.jsx file, I'm going to paste that in. And make sure I copied it. Copy, paste. Now we are going to clear out the expand more because we're not going to have an expand more. We're going to rename this to be image. We don't need that expanded state. We're going to clear out this expanded click function. The card will not need an avatar, so we'll clear out this avatar of the card header. We will also not have any actions like this, so we'll clear out those. We'll keep the title for now. The card media as well will show our cat picture. The typography is where we might show some description about the cat breed or the cat breed name. And the favorite icon is something we'll keep for now too. Everything else can go. And we'll delete that all the way down to the closing collapse. Looks like we need to close off that card actions. And card actions. And that should, yep. So that's a nice blank card that'll act as our image. Now let's make a random feed of those with cat pictures. So we're going to use the grid layout that MUI comes with. So I'm just going to replace this root div with a grid, and we're going to give it the container, and we're going to give it the columns. Again, you could pull this out of the MUI webpage. There's plenty of good examples on there, but this is the style of layout I'm going to go with, depending on the size of the browser. Let's run with that for now. We could adjust later. Let's close off that grid, and we will then. We're going to make a request to the cat API. So let's make a function in here called, we'll make an async function, and we're going to have it called async function refresh images. And this function will make a request to the cat API for random images. So first of all, we're going to need a variable that we're going to save those images to. So let's do const images, which has been the name of the variable, and the function, yes, to set those images. I'm going to assume that you've used React before, and so you know that it likes to be immutable. So we don't want to update this images array directly. Anytime we want to update this images array, we'll want to go through set images. So in this function, we're actually going to clear out any images that we had. So we're just going to do set images as a blank array. Next, let's start with a try-catch handler. That's always good practice, so we can catch any errors. And we'll console log out that error. In here, we're actually going to use the inbuilt React fetch. So GitHub Copilot in this case is handily suggesting this code block. Let's run with that. It's nice and simple. We're just going to change out this URL to call to actually be the cat API. So let's go HTTPS. It's suggesting that, which is great. So we're going to call the cat API URL for the documentation. Let's just open that documentation now. So that is developers.thecatapi.com. And in here, once it loads, let's see, 101, getting cat images. we are going to make a request to the images search endpoint. Now this will return a random cat image if we just call it without any parameters, but in this case we're going to update and use the limit parameter to return more than one image. So it'll return between 1 and 0 depending on what parameter we pass, what value we pass. It'll max out at 10 unless we use our API key. So just sign up for a free API key and then you can have up to 100 cat images returned in any one request. Most of these other things also require an API key too. So I've actually gone ahead and registered for a test key for this tutorial, which I'll cancel after this. So don't bother copying this one because it'll be deactivated, but just copy your own. And we're going to take that to our code. Now with API keys, you want to protect them, right? So we'll look at how to protect them with a server-side proxy later on. In this instance, we're just going to store it as a local environment variable just to make it easier for us to code with. So in the root of my project, I'm going to create a .env file. Now React requires any environment variables, and these environment variables are essentially strings that are available throughout the app. It requires them to be prefixed with React app underscore, and then we can use whatever name we want for this variable. So we're just going to call it cat API key, and I'll paste in the value from the email. Let's save that. Now back in our random feed component, let's look at the documentation about how we use that key. So if we look at the email, it says we can add it as this X API key header, or we can add it as a query string parameter. Let's add it as a header, just because that is more scalable. So when we're making this fetch request, we can add a object as the second parameter, and in here we're going to do one called headers, which will be a object, and as GitHub Copilot is handily suggesting, it's going to be called XAPI key. We're not going to use this value. I don't know where it stole this value from. We're going to call ours, we're going to get it from the environment file. We're going to call it env dot. What was it called? I think we called it, my terrible memory, we called it React app cat API key. So we're going to make a request to the cat API, get me some images. Let's add that limit on here. So we're going to ask for 12 images. We're authenticating with our API key, so it'll give us more than 10 at once. It's going to return JSON. We're using a wait here so that these actions will be run sequentially, and then that JSON, which will be an array of cat images, will then be set as our images variable, which will trigger that to cause a refresh of this, a re-render of this text down here where we're going to put our image components. Let's just clear this out and clear that out. Great, let's save this. So we're going to assume that this images variable here will be an array of images or an empty array. With that in mind, let us do a map through this array to generate out either no images if it's an empty array, or if it's finished loading, it'll be an array of cat images. So let's do a block of code in here. Let's do images just to check the images is there. And yeah, as it suggests, we'll do images.map. In there, though, we're actually going to use the image component we generated earlier from the card. So let's go image. Is it? Yep. So we want the one from the file. We're going to add in. We're going to give it a the actual item of the array. So this images array, as it loops through that array, it allows us to get the individual element that's on the image. We're going to pass that image object into our image component. And then we just need to finish off this. And give that a save. Now let's add this random feed to our app, and we should start seeing some action. That's actually just called feed, and if it's not in our autocomplete, that means that we have called a feed, and make sure that it is, we need to of course export it. This is what happens when you manually create a component instead of relying on handy shortcuts. Default feed, there we go. So in this case, we created the component and assigned it to this variable, but we didn't export that variable from the file. So we've now exported feed. Start retyping this, and yeah, handily will autocomplete that. Give it a save. Looks like we need to clear out a few things from that card. So we'll go back to the image and we'll clear out anything that we didn't use. We don't need that. We don't need the colors. Need the typography. Don't need the avatar, the collapse. And that is good. Let's call that the styled. And let's go back to our random feed and make sure that we actually call this refresh images at the start. So for this we'll use a use effect. Use effect. And in here we're going to refresh our images and we'll trigger it whenever anything happens. And it looks like we just need to make sure this favorite is cleared out here. Why don't we just make sure that that is added? So we'll do npm I UnFavouritng. Oh, doesn't look like it liked that one. I think that is because let me just run that again. So his favorite icon, here we go. Oh, of course, we need to actually include the MUI icons, material icons. So let's just close that app, add in those icons, and then rerun the app again. So the icons we're going to use are things like the favorite, where it's bordered, so it'll be the little heart icon. When it's empty, it's just the bordered version. And let's run our app again. Awesome. And we're going to just check that that loaded. So localhost 3000. Here we go. So we've got our grid of image components. Now the image, you can see the pie dish, obviously not there anymore because it's relative, and each of these have their own title that is the same. Let's see about customizing this, but we should have 12 images, which is great. And if we were to open the Chrome Inspector Tools, we would see network. We should see that request to the Cat API. So we made a request to api.thecatapi.com. Images search. We were expecting 12 images to be returned. We've only got 10. So that means that our API key probably wasn't authenticated properly. And we'll double check that next. We asked for 12, sent back 10. But looking in each of these image objects, we can see that it's got a height, unique ID for every image, a URL so we can make that request to load it, and a width. Going back to our code, in our random feed, when we're generating the image, we looped through the array, and then we added that individual element of the array, that object, which contains the height, the ID, the URL, and the width, to the image component, and we set it as the data property. So if we go into that image component now, and we tell the image component that it should expect data as a variable, we can then start using all of those properties. So instead of that static pia, how about we change that to the URL of the image? And instead of a title, how about we just so you can see it, we do the data.url too. We'll clear out the subheading, we don't need that, and we don't need we can leave that as, let's set that as 200 for now. Actually, let's do that as 300, just because that'll maximum the height of the image to 300. And let's have a look. If we close our Chrome Inspector tools, we can see we've got our images coming through. The URL at the top is the title, and each of these lovely, beautiful, random kitty pictures. Right, next step, we're going to actually have some breed information about these kitties. So, there's a field we can do in the API documentation that is only available once we have an authenticated API key. So let's just make sure we're authenticating correctly. Yep, we are doing headers, API key. One thing to double check, which we probably just need to make sure, is we're doing content type application JSON, and the environmental variable is loaded in properly. So as we saved that earlier, we'll need to restart our app before that'll be present. So let's just close our app, start our app again. That'll then load in this environment variable file and allow it to be used. Great, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've still only got 10, so let's just make sure I haven't done anything silly. So, you know what I've done? I put the environment variable in the source folder. It actually needs to live outside in the project root. Let's put that into there so you can see it's now outside in the same directory as the package JSON. I'm going to close this app again, start her up, and have another look. Let's give that a refresh. So we should now see 12. And we'll open a Chrome Inspector just to double check. Refresh. And we requested 12. And we have 12, 0 through 11, so 12 elements. Now, we can see we've now got this empty breeds array. Now, if a image has been categorized to contain one or more breeds, then each of those breeds will be available as an object inside of this breeds array. So let's force the API to only return images that include breeds. And that'll give us a bit more information to work with. So back in our code editor, random feeds, we've added the limit as a query parameter. Let's add the cat, I can spell, TheCatAPI.com. Let's now add that flag that'll force it to only return images with a breed. Look in the documentation, you see getting images. You can see all the parameters we can pass. We want to use this one, has breeds, and we want to use a 1 because we want to force it to only return images that have breed information. So let's copy that, has underscore breeds. We're going to add it as another query parameter, has underscore breeds equals 1. Click save, that'll re-render, go back to our app, find the latest request that the app made to the API, and we can now see this breeds array actually has at least one element. In this case, the first image, the breed is a Greek Aegean breed, and you can see all of the weird and wonderful information that we have about each of these cat breeds. So it's temperament. Apparently they're affectionate, social, intelligent, and playful. Apparently they're pretty friendly to strangers, which you'd expect. Don't really shed that much. And they live between 9 and 12 years. So that looks like that image here. Let's start using that information and display it instead of the cat URL and instead of this instructions on how to make paella. So back in our image component, we have the data object in here. Now instead of just the URL, let's use the if we open the Chrome inspector, we can look at the documentation, but in this case, let's see what was actually sent back. So give this a refresh. We're going to pull out their breed name and the temperament, maybe the origin, and there should be a description in here somewhere too. Yeah, description. So we'll grab the description. We'll grab the temperament and we'll grab the name. The name is there. Name, Bengal. Great. So we're going to set the card header title to be name. Then let's set this typography to be description. Data.breeds. Now remember, it is an array of breeds. And so we're going to pick the first one. In fact, let's make that a bit tidier. Let's do a local variable in here called breed, which will be the data.breeds. And we'll make it the first element in the array. And if that doesn't exist, then rather than crash our app, let's just make that an empty object for now. So we can shortcut this to just be breed.name, and we can shortcut this, or this should have been breed.name, sorry, and this will be breed.description. Now this will be a variable amount of length long, so we'll just show you this for now, and then we'll change that for the temperament. And here they go. So we've got our Bengal, British short hair, a bit of description about the kitty, and a beautiful example of that kitty. Again, let's just swap that out for the temperament, just so it's nice and short. Awesome. Let's add a bit of space between these images just to lay them out a bit nicer. So for this, we'll probably need to add a bit of padding to the card. And we're going to make sure that we've added an inner grid to that random v2. So we've got an outer grid. Sure, let's just simply put in an inner grid to wrap that image. And that'll allow us to just lay it out a bit nicer. So let's add another grid in here. Looks like it's taken a string. Let's just... we want to be a grid. We'll give it the item key. Of course, we know that each image has a unique ID, so that's fine to use. Then let's give it styling. So we'll give it an excess of 2. Let's give it an SM of 4, so small, and a MD of 4. Let's go ahead and close that image, grid tag. The component is now complete. Awesome, that's a bit better. So again, we've got this variable height because of a temperament, but we can sort that out in the image card itself. But all these images are now nicely laid out, and as we shrink them down, they change according to the grid rules. So you could see there's no margin at some point, so we'll add a bit of padding to the actual image itself. So we have it set to be a maximum width, but I think if we change this up to margin of 2, that, yeah, gives us a nice little bit of margin between each of them. Beautiful. Now let's change this favorite icon to an actual checkbox. So we don't want it to be a button. We want it to actually act as a checkbox. So let us change that to checkbox. And the icon for that checkbox will be, let's do the favorite. And we're going to use the bordered version of the favorite, so it won't have a filled center. So the user will look at it and go, oh, well, yeah, I could click on that. And then let's set the checked icon. So that's the icon when it's default unchecked. And we will do the checked icon equal to favorite. For this one, we could just use the favorite icon that we had earlier. And let's close out this checkbox component. Well, if that compiles without errors, then we should be able to go and start clicking on those favorite icons. Whilst that's compiling, let's just go through here. We'll change the alt of the image. It's always good practice to set the alt of an image to something that's screen readable, just for anybody who has accessibility requirements. So we'll set that to be the breed name. So any screen reader will look down and go, okay, well, that was an image of this cat breed. And let's have a look. Give that a check. Great. So our app so far, it is a clean React app with a nice sticky. Looks like we need to make that sticky. That NavBar will make sticky so that it stays there. It makes a request to the CatAPI that asks for 12 images, and it asks for only images that contain breed information. We're then using that breed information to show the breed name and the temperament of that breed, and we're going to allow our users to favorite those individual cat images, and we're going to save those favorites to an array so that we can have a toggle to show the user, hey, do you want to see the images that you favorited, or do you want to see random new images? And so for this one, we're going to create a new component called favorites feed.jsx. In here, we're going to copy the content of our random feed, paste it in. We're going to rename the function to be favorites feed. We'll make sure we're exporting favorites feed. And now we're going to change the URL of the cat API we're calling. So in this case, we don't want to grab random images, we want to grab our favorites. So let's open the documentation. So we'll go to thecatapi.com, open the documentation, and then on the left hand side we'll go down to favoriting. So this endpoint we can call getOn to get any favorites that we currently saved. We could post to it to create new favorites, or we can delete from it to delete existing favorites. So let's copy this URL, and so to create a favorite we need an image ID. So we'll send an object with an image ID, which will be the ID of the image we want to favorite, and the sub ID, which could be the unique ID of your user. So let's amend the URL we're going to make a GET request on to getting any existing favorites. We can use our existing API key, and we're going to expect an array of images. But we need to transform the response because we are going to expect an array of favorites, and each favorite will have an image. So here's an example. So this ID is a unique ID of the favorites. The image ID is the unique ID of the image that we pass when creating the favorite. Optional sub ID when it was created, and inside is this image object, which we can see is the same or similar format to the response we get when we're calling images/search. So what we'll need to do is just reformat this object slightly to have the ID and the URL in the top level of the object, and the favorite information nested within it, so it matches the response from get images. So where it has the URL in the root and the unique ID of the image in the root, that's what we want to recreate. So let us do a map in here, and we'll do const mapped equals json.map, and we're going to return a new object, which will be, the ID will be the image dot, in this case it's actually the favorite is the root, so we'll do favorite dot image dot ID, and the URL will be that's the one, and then inside we'll have favorite, and for that we can just use itself and return. Great. And one more. So we'll expect a response to the favorites. We're going to map that to a standard response that we use from the images search, and now this component will be able to work in exactly the same way as the random feeds. Now inside of the image we're going to expect the data to be exactly the same, and inside of the data we're going to expect that favorite object to be inside. So let's again consult the documentation, and so when we're getting images we should expect this favorite object to be in the root if it's been created on this image. So we can declare a local variable, and in this case we'll call that local variable favorite. We'll allow ourselves to set that value, and we're going to default that value to be data.favorite. Now the checkbox we had earlier, let's make that checked if that favorite is valid. So we'll do a double hash favorite. Give that a save, and next we'll add some functions where if the user clicks that favorite to be checked between true or false, we're going to handle that action by doing const, let's make a handler for it, handle favorite toggle because the user can toggle it on or off. That will invert the current value of favorite, and we actually want to do something different. We want to make a request to the API, so we'll want to know, is it currently being favorited, yes or no? And if it is, then we want to save the action to the API, and if it isn't, then we want to delete that favorite from the API. So let's create a nice referenceable is favoriting, nice simple variable that we know what it is. We'll actually, if we are is favoring, if the action is favoriting, then let's make that request to the API to create the favorite. So looking in the documentation, we can see to create a favorite we need to pass an object. One of these is optional, one of these is required. Here's an example, so let's copy this example, paste that in. We need to change this image ID to be the current ID of this image, so we'll pull data .id. We're not going to pass a sub ID. That'll be the new favorite, and if we then call set favorite with the value returned from the API, new favorite, we'll be calling the API to create that favorite, and then we're going to set that again locally. We'll need to make sure this function is a sync, obviously. Let's change that to be a sync function and make sure that's a proper function. And then we're going to have this function called whenever the user clicks on the checkbox. So that's just a standard on change. So when the user clicks to favorite the image, it's going to call this function. We're going to determine whether the current action is to favorite that image or to unfavorite it. If it is favoriting, then we're going to create the favorite on the API. Else, let's delete that favorite from the API. Looking in the documentation again, here's an example about deleting. So we'll copy this. In fact, let's just copy the one we used earlier, paste that in, and in this case we're actually going to, instead of post, we're going to delete. And we don't need to pass a body, but what we do need to do is get the unique ID of the favorite we're about to delete. That is, of course, saved as the favorite object. So we can do, we can instead change this out for those, and then simply call the favorite.id. That'll then delete the favorite, and we can then call set favorite as null, because there won't be any favorite. Okay, let's have a look and see if this works. So here's our app. Make sure we've got the latest version. As a user, I'm going to click the favorite icon. I can see the API has been called. We've got a 401, so that means we're probably not calling the using the API key properly. Let's have a quick double check. We are not. We need to swap out this your key for the same API key usage that we used when getting a random feed. So we'll get that from the environment variable, and then back in our image we'll overwrite that API key, and we'll overwrite it again when deleting it. And while we're here, let's clean up the request to make sure that we're also adding the right content type header. So content type application JSON, copy that from where we made the request for the images. And in our image component, where we're making the request to create the favorite, we'll make sure we're adding that to the header. And when we're deleting the favorite, we'll make sure that's also added to the header. Click save. Let's just run through the code and make sure we're happy. So we're reusing this image component twice, once in the random feeds where we're expecting a breeds array, once in the favorites feed where we know that this breeds array doesn't yet exist. So in our favorites feed where we're mapping, so we're mapping the response of favorites to a different format to match the response from the images request. Let's also make sure we're adding breeds empty array in there. And make sure that we're using this mapped version to set images. Give that a save and make sure that all the code works. And so we're going to test that by using this favorite checkbox. I can see the API request was just made to favorite. Let's do another one on this Bengal. Favorites. Great. And we can see the response is a object containing a unique ID for that favorite and a nice message for success. It's unfavorite. It looks like that's gone undefined, so maybe we aren't saving this object properly, so that when we come to delete it, we're not actually able to get the ID. So let's have a quick double check now. In our image where we are favoriting, we're then waiting for the response, that object with the ID, setting that as the favorite. And then when it comes to delete, we'll take that favorite object and use its unique ID. So that all looks fine. Oh yeah, it looks like we are using the response without transforming it with the .json function. So the fetch will return the actual response, and what we want to do is new favorite is actually get the JSON body from the response. So we have to do await response.json, and that'll convert this response from the API request to create the favorite into a nice bit of JSON for us to then set as the favorite. Give that a save, and we will rerun our example. I will click to create a favorite. Favorite has been created. I'll unclick to delete that favorite, and we can now see that unique ID from the favorite ending 66 was then used in the delete request to the API. So we've gone slash favorites, unique ID for the favorite, delete verb on the HTTP request, and that's then deleted that favorite from our account. Now let's go ahead and make a little toggle button on our top navbar so we can toggle between our random kitties view and a view that shows all of the images that we've currently favorited. So I'm going to go to the MUI website again, and I'm going to look for a switch. There's many different controls that we can use. Let's just use a basic switch in this case. I want to use a label with it so that the user knows what they're switching between. So I'm just going to copy this example here back in our code. I will then go to the navbar, and after the typography, after the label for the app, I'm going to paste in what we copied, remove the second switch, and change the label to be show your favorites. It's going to be default. We want it to be default unchecked. So I'm going to change this to be default value equals let's just call it false. And we'll of course want a function to be triggered when the user actually runs through the checkbox. So let's do a function here called handle mode change. And we want to save this mode as a local variable. So the current mode. And we will default the mode to be false, so it's just going to be between true or false, and this mode is just going to be whether it's showing the favorites or not. And on handle mode change, we want to go set mode to be the new mode from the checkbox, and then we will do a on change for the switch. On change equals the function that we just talked about. Great. And let's just make sure that we import all of these things as well. So we'll do form group and form group label, form control label, and of course switch. So I'm just typing these in and letting the autocomplete do the import for us. Let's give that a try. We should now see show our favorites on the top here. Let's change the color of it so it stands out a little bit more. Let's do a gnarly red. So if we just change the color to error, that'll then give us that gnarly red that we're after. There it is. Now let's have our main app be notified when a user has clicked that button to switch between favorites mode and random mode. So in our app, we'll have this as a local variable, and so we'll call this show favorites. We'll just pluralize that, so it's show favorites, and we'll default that to false. And so we will then test that variable to go if it's true, show favorites, then we want to show the favorites feed. So we'll import that, favorites feed. Otherwise, show the standard feed. There's our test. Let's just make sure that we have imported use state properly. Let's just import that again. Use state, React. Great. And where we're having our navbar here, let's go on mode change. So this will be a new function we'll have in the navbar. And we'll do set show favorites. Now in our navbar, we'll need to use this on mode change. So at the top, we will expect on mode change to be passed in, and in our handle mode change, we're going to call that function with the value of checked to give this a test. So here's our standard random feed, and as we flip between them, we're now showing our favorites. So these are all images that we favorited. Let's favorite another one just to be sure. Let's favorite this cute looking American curl. Favorite that one. If we go show your favorites, we should see it at the very end. Now let's reorder this, because ideally you'd want it to be on the top left, the latest one. So in that request that we're making in our favorites feed to get all of our favorites, let's invert the order. So let's go order equals descending instead. So it's default to ascending. And here it is. The latest favorite is in the top left-hand corner. So our app is nearly complete. We can show a random feed of images, let our users come along and like any they like, favorite them, and then we review those favorites at their later discretion and unfavorite any images they like. You'll notice though, when I unfavorite it, it doesn't get removed from this list straight away until we refresh the page and then it's removed. So let's just quickly update our app to refresh this page when a user unfavorites one of the pictures. To do that, we'll have a function in our image that is called when a user unfavorites the image, so we can notify out any parents, and let's have that function that'll get called in our favorites feed. So in our favorites feed, we'll create a function in here called on image unfavorited, and it will accept a favorite ID, and all we're going to do is set the favorite again, but we're going to filter out the one favorite that's just been removed. So we're going to take the favorites array that we have, the images array that we have. We're then going to filter out any favorites, any image. So we're looping through all the images. We're going to filter out any images that have a favorite with the ID of the favorite ID that has just been passed as the first parameter. We're going to take this function name and we're going to add it to the image when we're creating it so that the image can call it. So we're going to go on unfavorite equals that function. Now we're going to have to tell this image component to expect on unfavorite, and we're going to have to change this from set favorites to set images. So set images, and now in our image component, let's tell it to accept a second item. This will be on unfavorite, and we're going to have a function. We're going to have this function called whenever the user is unfavoriting. Here we go. So here's where we delete the favorite. So let's have it call there. Reloading the app. We're on our favorites page. If I now unfavorite this kitty, it's removed. Now you can see it took a second or two to be removed because I had to call the API, wait for the API to say, yeah, I've unfavorited it, delete that favorite, and then the code that we said here on unfavorite would call. Now, because we're not actually waiting for any response from the API, we can remove the await there, and if we now unfavorite it, you can see we actually need to wrap that, and we can unfavorite these and they're deleted immediately. Right, looks like these needed cleaning out from my account. And that's it. So we've got our main app that shows all of our favorites and shows a random list of favorites, favoritable cats. Why don't we add a little loading icon here as well, just to make our app a little bit more responsive. So in our favorites feed, let's add a loader that is shown when there's currently no images. So let's wrap this grid in a top level element, because we'll want to add a box below and that can just be a straight box. Let's text align center, and inside this box we're going to test if images.length equals 0. Then we're actually going to put in here a circular progress bar. So we'll just do circular progress, and can close that node and close that function. We need to close that box. Let's review it. So when we click Show Favorites, we now get a little loader until the APIs come back. We can of course put a little space between there and the top. That's just a little margin that I'm sure you can add. So let's add another one in the main app using the same technique. So I'll copy and paste this box, put in our random feed, put it under the grid, wrap the top level grid in a node, click Save, and make sure that we've added box, we've imported box and circular progress. Switch between them, and we get a nice loader. Wonderful. There is our app. So it's a nice base for you to play with. So you can use the images breed to add anything you like in here. Stars. Are they friendly with other pets? All those sorts of things. Add a little button in here to go to Wikipedia. You can add a little button at the end here, load more kitties, or you can make it infinitely scroll. So that refresh images function, you could extend that to show more images, or like I say, have it call again as the user scrolls down the page, or just have a pagination button to go more left or right.